Appreciate everybody coming back in this morning. And first item of business, item 2, we have new councillor business. Anybody have any new councillor business? 3 minutes, none. So no business arising. Any correspondence for the session?
No.
Received any? We have no delegations, reports, or bylaws. So the first item on our agenda for dealing this morning is our bylaws, bylaw 8.1, which is dealing with zoning amendment bylaw 1501, bylaw number 4254, 2015 for consideration of third reading.
And adoption, Your Worship.
Sorry?
Third reading and adoption.
Yeah. So moved by Councillor McFadden, seconded Councillor Rogers. Discussion.
I'll start.
Councillor McFadden.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on last night's meeting. We can do that. You can comment on what happened last night.
Yep.
Very interesting. I thought most of the comments were from developers. There wasn't a lot of folks there other than that. And a couple of things. I heard often this talk, or the mention was made of affordability. And I don't think that's an issue at all. I think somebody, an investor, local or otherwise, builds a row of duplexes with suites and then they lease them out. So you have 6 or 12 people living in a duplex. We do have a significant shadow population that are using it. They're workers from out of town. And I understand that. The workers have to and will go to where the work is. That's just a fact of life. But I'm at the airport often, and every day you see 1 or 2 planes in there, and they pick up 15 or 20 people that are going back home to the island or the lower mainland, and they drop off 20 or 25 that are coming in for their 2-week tour. So I don't think the issue is making it affordable for families. The families are not here. They're still in Comox or Campbell River. I heard just recently that our school population has dropped by 50% over the last 10 or 12 years. So the families are not here. So I don't think affordability is an issue. Pardon me. And I think it was Mr. Stewart, I think it was, made mention of the fact that this proposal before us would limit a suite to 50% of the above grade square footage. And I think I heard him say that the BC building code says 40% of the total square. So I don't know if I heard that right. I did, okay. And I guess to staff, if we were to do this, is it meaningless because the 50%, because does the BC building code in fact trump our bylaw?
Through Your Worship, as the situation stands right now, a municipality can have more restrictive regulations than the building code. You can't have less restrictive. There is talk that the provincial government is going to move to uniformity and take the ability of communities to have any regulation outside the BC code away, but they haven't done that as yet.
Thank you. Those are my comments and my question, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Parslow.
I have several things to say about this bylaw, but I just want to follow up on what Councillor McFadden's talking about to staff. I have lost recollection of why we went above the standard of the BC building code. So can you refresh my memory why that was suggested? What was the reasoning of the Residential Development Committee?
Well, through Your Worship, the practical effect of the limitation is to go from 1-bedroom suites, which is what's proposed, to 2-bedroom suites. So the 40% of usable floor space in the entire building allows a suite large enough in the basement to contain 2 bedrooms. And so it was a package. Basically, the concept was to require a extra parking stall for each dwelling unit, but to limit those secondary dwelling units to 1 bedroom so that 1 parking space ought to be sufficient.
I got you. Thanks, Jim.
Can I answer to Mr. Parslow's question as well?
Sure.
The previous bylaw that was brought back for this one, I believe it was 40% on the above ground. That's what that, and then we amended that to the 50%. One of the reasons we amended it to the 50%, I believe, was because we would therefore limit that particular building, if it was on an average of a 1,200 square foot building, 50% of the main floor of the house would make that a 600 square foot suite. Thus, that would eliminate basically taking one bedroom out of that unit, keeping it to a one bedroom suite. Thus, you get away from an up and down duplex, where in the BC building code, it states that you can have a duplex, but it must be separated by a vertical wall. If you go by the BC building code, up to 90 square meters, I believe it is, you could essentially have an up and down duplex. In that original bylaw, it was 40% above grade. There was a letter that came from Mr. Stewart saying that he would be happy with 60% of the above grade. And I think when we went to the 50% of the above grade, I thought that was a bit of a compromise. Does that kind of help?
Councillor Parsley, you had another question?
Yeah. Well, just a comment on that. I mean, I can understand the rationale for trying to make these suites one bedroom and aligning that with the parking. Just reading some materials on these sort of things, that would therefore make the secondary suite totally unsuitable for a young family. Let's say, they've got a husband and wife or two partners living together and they have a young child. And I'm just reflecting, some statements have been made at this council table, which I don't disagree with, is to attract young families to actually set up and live here and make this their home. So I'm reflecting on that as at this moment. Do we want to, on the one hand, we want to deal with the parking issue, and the 50%, as Sats just said, does make that tidier, but on the other hand, are we working against young families relocating here? And so I am torn between those two.
But that would make the leap then that we're making the assumption the young families are renting the downstairs one bedroom suite versus the upstairs two bedroom or three bedroom suite. And I don't know if that's the case or not. But we're making that as an assumption.
Yeah. Of course, I always still tend to think that when I'm talking about these sweet things, that we've got owners actually living in them, but of course that's not the case in this town in many instances. The other matter is well summarized in the letter from Riza Saidi, and I think we need to discuss that. In this letter, he makes reference to what, in my mind, is something that I'm very uncomfortable with, is Swiss cheesing our community for zoning things. But there are some important principles in here that about treating everyone fairly in development business and equally. And on page 1 of his letter, item C, Bylaw 4254, he makes an exception for properties in CT1 and CT2 zones owned by wealthy out-of-town investors and developers. This same consideration was not extended to individual owners of existing properties like myself, who also followed the city's existing OCP and bylaws when investing in the community. One would expect council to apply the same standards of justice to all owners, regardless of their wealth, size, or status. It would seem unfair for the similarly legitimate concerns of these owners not to be considered in the bylaw. So I that sort of, if I use the word rhetoric, I don't mean it to be insulting at all. That sort of position, it resonates with me. I think I think we have to treat local developers, outside developers on the same playing field. And so I have problems, and I also have problems with Swiss cheese in the community. I therefore have problems with making it an exception for CD2 in this, CD1 in this bylaw, because it does seem to inject this notion of unfairness. So that's all I have to say at this moment.
Thank you. Councillor Javetkov?
I thought the spectrum of comments was pretty good last night. There were some developers, there were some real estate people, a number of local people. One of the main things that I heard was about suite size. We've got a standard in the BC Building Code that seems to be acceptable to our local residents, our young people, people that might have 2 kids that can utilize a basement suite. The limitation, and it's an artificial limitation to me, in the bylaw of 50% of the upper floor, restricts basically to 1 bedroom, like was mentioned here, and I don't see the need for 2 standards. We have a perfectly good standard in the building code, and it seems to be acceptable to our young people that are trying to buy homes and with mortgage helpers. And just looking through this document here on secondary suites that's provided by Ministry of Community, Aboriginal and Women's Services, covers off a lot of the low-income issues, low-income housing, Aboriginal housing, that type of thing, which I think was missed last night. I don't think anybody spoke about that directly, although it did come out in a couple of the real estate people's comments. So the suites, I'm a strong advocate of using the BC Building Code as opposed to having a different standard for the bylaw. The other issue was parking, and I think Shaylee was counting the number of comments regarding parking. There was in excess of 50. Parking seems to be the main focus on complaints, and I think it's easy to deal with. I think we need to designate an adequate number of stalls of adequate size for parking. Somebody mentioned last night that if you've got a 60-foot lot, you could have 40 feet of it designated for parking, and you could park 4 vehicles in there quite easily. If you limit the parking stalls to the, I forget what the dimensions were, but it's tough to park in there because you can't open the doors. So I think parking is an easy thing to deal with, and I think a lot of these issues that come up with secondary suites, with coach houses, with the number of accommodations per lot, parking, having a suitable parking bylaw would mitigate those issues. The other thing, I guess, that struck me was and this was a comment mainly from real estate people and the public, like local people, young people, to do with having the ability to have a secondary suite. And I think this bylaw limits the secondary suites to RS2 zone, and I think it should be expanded to RS1. A lot of these young people would like to have a home in an RS1 zone with a mortgage helper. You know, you just have to look at the size of the mortgages these days. I don't know how a lot of these young people can afford to buy a home. This is one way that that they would get a bit of a leg up on purchasing a home. I have to admire a lot of these young people that spoke last night, and the real estate people. They're talking about young people that are actually investing and want to buy a home and use this as a tool to help them. You know, I think back to my young life and investing wasn't a priority, so it's interesting and it's refreshing to see that these young people are actually, you know, looking at I guess improving their lifestyle. So there are a number of amendments that I'd like to see. Well, an amendment with a number of conditions in it that I would like to see for this bylaw.
Thank you. So just for clarification, I just want to clarify that through to administration. So any amendments to the bylaw today, take it back, we rescind 1 and 2, take it back to a new bylaw?
Not necessarily, Your Worship. If the amendments that are being proposed are within the scope of what you took to the public hearing, then you're allowed to amend on third reading and adopt. The reason for that is obvious. You are required to come to a public hearing with an open mind and possibly be convinced by what you hear. So it wouldn't make any sense that if you are convinced by what you hear, that then you've got to go back to another public hearing. It'd be a treadmill. You'd never get to the end.
Yeah.
But if you propose something that's out of scope, what was on the table, so for instance, not in your, although there was discussion about it last night, not in your bylaw are things like rooming house regulations, business licenses for suite owners, parking bylaw. Not in it was size of allowable parking area. Those are not things that were taken to the public. So if you're going to move on those would have to go back to another public hearing.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Rogers, you were first up. You had a...
I think Ms. Schumann wanted to.
Okay. Councillor Schumann?
Did you have it? I want to go last.
I want to go last. I'm pretty good with this bylaw. Right up until we get to the nonconformity issue. I'm pretty worried about how we're going to deal with that. I guess we can deal with it afterwards, is what I'm being told. But the one amendment that I would most like to see is just to put the size of the suites back to the BC Building Code. So if I was going to propose an amendment, I think that's the amendment I would propose, and I think it's within the scope of what we've discussed. And so I don't know if everybody wants to speak before we start doing those kind of things, like proposing amendments.
Well, we'll
talk first.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So that's just my one thing. Like I can live with the RS1 and suites and duplexes, and like I can live with this. Yeah. So.
Thank you. Councillor Schumann, or Councillor Wilbur, sorry?
Councillor Schumann already spoke.
Yeah, she spoke.
Yeah.
You're next.
One thing that did come out several times last night was the suite size and regarding the BC Building Code. So that's something that I agree that perhaps we should be following the BC Building Code. The other thing though that did resonate for me was how do we not have all these non-conforming suites? Like originally there was a clause in there about grandfathering them, so I don't know if that's an amendment then that puts us back at the drawing table, but we have to address that somehow. If not in this, we need to address it somehow, because we've got, what, 300 plus suites that are legal, but they're going to become non-conforming, and that doesn't create a level playing field, right? So that bothers me. And just to a comment that actually Councillor McFadden had made, yes, there may be a decline in the public school system, but I bet if you talk to the private schools, they'll tell you there's been an increase in their enrollment. So until I've seen actual numbers, I can't base any decision on decline or increase of students. And then the other thing that kind of resonated me with, we had the exemption for the CD1 and CD2, and it was made apparent last night that that's not necessarily needed. It was kind of something that came agreed upon by all developers, and I don't look at developers of where you come from, if you're in town, out of town, or from Mars. You're a developer, or you're an investor, or you're going to be an owner. So I think if we just call them developers or investors, that would create a fair playing field, because where you come from is irrelevant. So, and I know that's not in here, and we will have to look at it forward, but I just, again, and Councillor Parslow mentioned it, parking was mentioned 57 times. Like, so to me, what came out of that hearing was not so much all of these things that the developers were talking about, but from our residents, I was hearing parking is a problem in my neighborhood. So hopefully moving forward, we'll get onto parking bylaw quickly and tighten that up. The other thing that I found interesting, which came from Jody when he spoke, was the DCC charges, and someone had mentioned about increasing taxes. So we can't do that. However, if DCC charges would trigger BC assessment to assess those homes that have the suites in them, I think the tax would increase. So I think somehow we have to put some teeth in that and look, moving forward, look at how we can recoup some of that, and maybe it'll help with some of our issues we have. But I do think that we can safely remove the CD2 exemption, and we've heard concerns that the playing field is not fair, so I think we should make it fair. I think the suites should be by the BC Building Code, and if possible, I think we need to somehow put in here some sort of clause that does not leave us with a bunch of non-conforming existing legal suites. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Rogers?
Okay, I'm going to go all over the place here. I've stated previously that we need to get this bylaw passed, whether we amend it today, but I stress that it has to get passed. We need to give our developers direction, and then it'll enable us to start dealing with the parking issues and the rooming houses, because that to me is a separate issue, and then we can deal with the non-conforming as a separate issue. Most of the issues, and this all started with parking and snow removal. We live in the north. Snow is that's what we get. Parking. You name me a community that doesn't have a problem with parking, and name me a northern community where people aren't complaining about the snow removal. So that is, I don't think there's any solution to make everybody in the community happy about snow removal and parking, although I consider Dawson Creek's snow removal to be second to none after spending countless hours going up to Fort St. John, Chetwynd, Grand Prairie, and touring all those communities when I first started dealing with this bylaw, trying to find out from other municipalities what they're doing with their snow removal, what they're doing with their parking, and what they're doing with their densities. And from what I had seen in other communities, we're doing a great job. So when I was at that meeting, I didn't hear anybody that was 30 years old that said that they had a house with a duplex or a house with a suite in it. I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't see a whole lot of those people standing up and saying, oh, we have to have this because I just bought a house with a suite in it. I think that with the amount of houses that are being built with suites in them, the duplexes that are being they're suited, I would be hard pressed to say that there would be a majority of those people that live in this town, that have lived in this town, that had purchased one of those properties. I think these properties are all being bought as doors by out-of-town investors and local investors. Don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But when I hear these people saying to me that well, we're doing this for the people that are 30 years old that are wanting to move here and raise their families in the house. I find that part of it is I'm getting a little bit of smoke blown, and I don't agree with what they're saying. I do believe that most of those doors are being built and for investors, and there's nothing wrong with that. But don't tell me that you're doing it for the citizens that live here and the people and the young families that are wanting to move here, because I haven't seen any indication yet that that's actually happening. Got to go back to my notes again. There was a lady that had spoke. Lorraine had talked about a carriage house being built across the street from her house. I checked her zoning. She is in an RS1 neighborhood, but currently the bylaw says in an RS1 neighborhood that you can actually have a coach house. So in the new bylaw, we would be saying that we will not be having coach houses in RS1. So we heard from the community, even though it was only one person, that she didn't want to see a coach house or suites being put into an RS1 neighborhood. So that was what I got from the community, and talking to other people about the amount of RS1 that is in the community right now. And the RS1 in Dawson Creek is limited to maybe 1% if you exclude the new subdivision which we passed for development yesterday. I understand everybody's concerns about bringing camps to community. That to me is a very powerful statement, because we do have to get those people out of the camps and we do have to get them into our community. We had also talked about CD2 and CD1. Those people had a business plan. Mr. Stewart last night had said he has almost completed his part of his construction on his CD2. CD1 doesn't even have duplexes in it. So that to me is a non-issue regarding CD1. With the CD2 that is currently being developed, it's almost done. So I would just say let those guys do what they do. They started a project, they have a plan, let them finish it. Second. Regarding Canada Pacific Investment Dawson Hills, that was Ralph Vanderwally, I believe his name was. I hadn't talked to him. I believe I talked to just about every single developer and contractor in town. In all honesty, I had not talked to him. I understand his concerns because he has approximately 31 RS1 lots on his property. I think his intent on that was to put suites in those RS1 units. He's already zoned RS2. So he could put duplexes in, and he had 29 RS2 lots. But what we have heard from the citizens, we don't want suites and duplexes. That came out of the out of the committee, and from most of the people in town, and from most of the residents of this town say that they don't want to see suites and duplexes because it is causing parking problems and everything else. So, and if you want to call it what it is, it's a fourplex. So quit calling it a duplex and call it a fourplex, because that's exactly what it is. And he also has some RM1 lots there. I think the biggest effect for him would be that he has, in his development, 31 RS1 lots. And I believe he was probably talking about Sweeting those. He's purchased that property, and he's owned it since 2007. Why it's taken so long to develop it, I have no idea. And with the numbers that he had given in his thing, taking a house from $350,000 to $600,000, that's speculation. He referred to what was going on in Fort McMurray. Okay, well, what's going on in Fort McMurray right now is they have seen a dramatic drop in residential houses, and by over $20,000 a drop in that price in the last few months. So I'm speculating that with the price of oil being where it's at, I think that maybe all of our residential housing is going to stay the same over the next 5 years. Also, the conforming and the non-conforming, that can be dealt with later. The thing that I'm hearing from everybody right now is the 40% rule. Everybody wants, from what I'm hearing from council and from what I heard last night at the meeting, that everybody would like to go back to what the BC Building Code says for a suite sizing in a RS2 zone.
I didn't hear that. I didn't hear everybody say that last night.
I heard a lot of people say that.
I didn't hear Pat Rorson say that.
Actually, I made a note of those.
I didn't hear a number of developers. I heard it from one.
Okay. I look at that, and in the BC Building Code, when you want to define a suite in a duplex or a single family home, or sorry, in a duplex, it says, as a rule, no. So I don't know why the developers didn't look at it, that we're building a duplex, and said, oh yeah, we can put a suite in it. But the first four words that came out of that was, as a rule, no. And then it went on to describe how you could do it. So at that point, you might want to look at it and go, okay, it's really not recommended. I do applaud Mr. Rorson for saying last night that that he was in support of the bylaw as it is right now. I'm hesitating right now to put forth a motion regarding the building code rules versus the 50% rule that we have right now. I'd like to, maybe everybody should take an opportunity to take a moment and think about, do you want a single family house that is basically, you can turn into an up and down duplex? I believe there was a plan that was put out by Mr. Stewart that showed what they're planning for a future development with their suites in their RS2 zone. Didn't leave much of a basement left. It is sized up to 90 square meters for a maximum size, which is pretty much taking up the whole house. So therefore you do end up with an up and down duplex. So the only part I have about that is, if that amendment were to go forward regarding going back to the BC Building Code, in our current bylaw, we have one parking stall for a secondary suite. If it goes to the BC Building Code, that would allow them to have 2 suites. So therefore, I'd have to say that we would also have to amend that there be 2 off-street parking stalls for a secondary suite. I'm done.
Thank you. So I'm going to just speak to a number of issues. First of all, in regards to how it started, Councillor Rogers, it started our conversation started last probably October, November, and it wasn't as a result of parking or snow removal, but it was about council wanting to engage with the business community, the investors, developers, realtors, and talking about what our policy was doing with respect to development. And it was about that whole issue rather than just specifically around parking or snow removal. And I applaud council, right, in terms of, we spent a lot of time over the last year and a half, the past council. We spent probably 2 months, 3 months dealing with 14, 15 meetings, dealing with all, when we invited everybody into the room, and we met individually with every one of the interested parties, understanding our policy of development in terms of what it was doing and the development of our community. And we got some great feedback through that process. And some of that feedback was exactly what we're talking about today in terms of the density and people talking about the concerns around suites in our duplexes and suites in residence, and that's all we're seeing. And so from there, obviously, we've all engaged in the conversation and discussion over the last year and a half of how we've got here and how we're getting to the point of trying to move it forward. And for me, I can speak personally from the experience, first of all, I think the issue of suites and duplexes, you're correct, it is a fourplex, and we've had that conversation. And the hiccup seems to be this morning around the designation of how much of the size of the residence we're going to allow for a suite in a residence in RS2. And your comment, and exactly right, it is a fourplex. And what I've seen in developing is residences with 1,100 square foot home with 40% of the total square footage turns it into an 880 square foot suite downstairs. So the parking issue isn't driven by somebody from Mars dropping these vehicles onto our streets and parking there as a result of the people renting within those residences. They're not being bought by the young homeowners, the 30-year-old looking for a mortgage helper. They're being rented out as complete units, 4 bedrooms, and they're up and down duplexes. I've lived it over the last year. I don't know how many of you have actually lived it in terms of having the suites with in the duplexes.
I have.
Yeah, good. And so it is an issue. It is an issue in terms of, and I've experienced it personally from my new home in terms of where we're living, and that's what we got all the way down one street. And so to me, we need to address that because it's not about. This isn't about any one of us specifically, it's about guiding our community for the future. 90% of what's going on in our community today is being developed by the investment, the business community, meeting the demands of the rental market. They're getting an 8 and 12% cap return on their investment because it's a strong rental market. That's great for our community. Any community would love to have what we got going on, and I think we should embrace it. But we also need to manage it for the future in terms of what our community looks like when this market surge of the rental demand, while we're seeing this construction of projects go on, and it's going to go on for 4 or 5 or 6 years, but at the end of that, we need to have residential development. We need to have single-family homes where people can have a place in a neighborhood. We heard it at the Mayor's Roundtable from the industry people saying, "You guys, our guys are looking to buy a home here, but they're not buying what you got right now." And that was clear from some of them. So to me, I think we need to be guiding this. We're never going to get it right. We're never going to get it perfect. I think the aha moment for me was when Jim and I met with the mayor in Grand Prairie, Mayor Givens, with his planning staff. And after 25 years of a community going from 15,000 people to 60 or 70,000 people, they're still dealing with it today. So there is no perfect component to this that we're going to get that's going to drive us to a utopia of saying, okay, we're here. You look at the Mayor of Calgary, he's fighting with his council right now on suites. In Vancouver, they're dealing with the issues of suites. So we're not ever going to get a perfect bylaw that's going to satisfy our community, the investment, the business community. But I think we got to try and make the best decision we can in moving it forward. And the density issues, to me, in terms of some of the components we faced, I think are driven by suites and duplexes and the size of the suites we're allowing in single-family homes, residences, that are not residents with suites for a mortgage helper for the 30-year-old individual. They're being rented out individually. So for me, that's my perspective, that's my opinion. I think we deal with the non-conforming after. I think that's an issue for the people that have made an investment in our community. We've got to make sure we try to enhance and protect that for them. We can't put them at risk because they have made a commitment into our community. But for me, it's the two issues I think are suite size in terms of the residents, and we need to ensure we manage that for the future. Otherwise, where we'll see it. And to say it last night, the 60-foot lot, and you can put a 40-foot driveway in, go look at the lots. They're 50 feet. You can't open the back door in some of those houses without hitting your door on the back fence. They're not big lots. They're 50 by 90. So that's part of the issue too, right? You create so much strain on the lot size. There isn't room to put. You got 5 rooms, you got 5 bedrooms in a single family home with a duplex with 2 downstairs. You need 5 off-street parking spots then, because that's who's renting it. Anyway, that's Dale's Councillor Javette first.
I don't know if we just hear what we want to hear at these hearings, or I tried to make notes of everybody that spoke, and I didn't get some of their names, but some of them I did, and some of them stood out to me. And one of them was Josh Anderson's comments. He's got a young family, and they've decided that his wife would be a stay-at-home mom. So they're looking for a place that's affordable, and suggested that it's not easy to find a place that's affordable for a family with a single income. And suggested that suites are a mortgage helper. And this is a young person in our town that's going to be living here. So I heard that loud and clear, maybe because I know Josh, but so I think it's, it's pretty important. So in the interests of moving this whole issue forward, in the interests of concluding it today, like was suggested by Mark, I would like to propose an amendment here to take the suite size out of the bylaw and default to the BC Building Code, and require an additional parking space for each bedroom in the suite. And I would like to leave it at that, although I have other issues, but I think in the interest of concluding it, that amendment to me makes some sense, and it seems like there is some support for it here.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for the amendment?
I'll
second. Seconded, Councillor Rogers. Discussion, Councillor Schumann.
So I had my hand up to speak because that's what I was thinking when we were talking about going back to the BC Building Code. We start talking about, is that going to solve the parking issue? Well, if we make it so that you have to have a parking space for every bedroom in that suite, if you've only got a certain size lot and you can't provide that parking, then you're only going to make a 1-bedroom suite, obviously. And so, that's how that will roll out. So I absolutely support that amendment.
Thank you. Further discussion? Councillor Rogers?
I'd like to remind everybody that it's not the city that's building these houses. It's the developers that are building these houses. So
and individual homeowners.
And an individual homeowner. So it's up to those people to they're building a house, and they should be allowing for that parking. That should have happened years ago, when you started seeing the other stuff going up on 18th Street. Those people that were building those units, they knew what they were doing. I was working on those houses, and when you had the plumbers working there and the electricians working there was nowhere to park your cars. And that was one of the things that we were all complaining about. What's going to happen when all these people move in and there's nowhere to park their cars? So, I'd just like to remind the public, it's not the city of Dawson Creek that had developed all that and had built all that. That would go back to the homeowners and the contractors and the builders and the developers. They're the ones that, in my opinion, they're the ones that made that mess. And we had a bylaw in place, but I think what ended up happening was greed took over, investment money took over, and people stopped thinking about what's going to happen later on. Regarding the motion put forward, I'm still hesitant about it. I probably won't know until we're asked to vote on it, what I will do. And that's the way that this thing's gone since day one for me. I've had my opinion, but then I'm also reminded, what do the citizens of Dawson Creek want? What do developers want? What does everybody want? You'll never get everybody to agree on everything. That's it.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment? You ready for the question? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. And now on the motion?
This is for third reading and adoption of the amended?
Yeah. Have we had sufficient discussion on the motion as amended? All those in favor? Opposed? Sorry, I need to call it again. All those in favor?
Say the question again.
Of the motion.
The motion.
That we're moving forward with the motion.
The amendment.
As amended.
As
So
amended.
maybe perhaps we can review what that would mean now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Secondary suites would only be permitted in single-family dwelling in an RS2 zone. Secondary suites would not be permitted in duplexes in any other zone other than CD2. Any dwelling unit that contains a secondary suite or coach house must provide a parking stall for each bedroom in that secondary dwelling unit. Only one secondary dwelling unit per property is permitted in the approved zones, i.e. you cannot have a secondary suite and a coach house on one property. The maximum accessory building size would be increased from 750 square feet to 780 square feet. The maximum size of a secondary suite will be calculated based on 40% of the habitable total floor space as per the BC Building Code. The proposed changes do not apply to either CD1 or CD2 zones unless expressly stated, and you'll be repealing zoning amendment bylaw 1417, bylaw number 4243, 2014. That's the effect of what you're doing.
Thank you. So that give it for everybody? You
Yes.
all right? Councillor Rogers?
I just need a second here. So what we're going to be voting on is to go to the BC Building Code, going back to secondary suites in RS2 zones or RS2 and RS1 zones?
RS2?
RS2 only. RS1 stays RS1, right?
Yeah, I think clear.
I'm clear.
All right.
Okay.
Everybody okay? Clear? Ready for the question? Councillor Parslow?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to be causing ourselves some real problems down the road with making an exception to CD2. It will be, I will prophesize, if I can use that word, a burr in our saddle, because as we already have had several developers say, we want that as well. And so I'm not going to support this bylaw.
Thank you. Ready for the question? Are you?
Not yet, just a second. I just, I'm trying to find some paperwork there. I just wanted everybody to be clear on the what CD2 zone actually is. And how much of it is.
Does everybody, so before you do that, does anybody need clarification on CD2 or CD1?
No?
I think they're good.
Oh, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
You ready for the question on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Further,
Just
sorry, Councillor
one more
Rebecca?
comment here, and I didn't bring it up before because I didn't want to confuse the issue here, but, you know, if you go back into historical times, we've got areas on 95th and 96th that have no parking spaces off-street. My son lives up on 95th, and at night when you go through there, it's like weaving through a maze, because there is no parking, off-street parking. Those people, if they've got two vehicles, they're both on the street. So, you know, I mean, it's, parking is the issue. That's what we have to deal with. And if we need a parking space for each bedroom upstairs, I think that's something that we can consider in the future, but
Parking isn't going to be solved by saying, okay, well, we'll increase the suite sizes and allow more vehicles, more residents to live in there. Like, I don't get where you think the parking's coming from. Anybody. It's coming from people living in the residence, renting the rooms.
it's controllable. Parking is controllable.
Not on a 50-foot lot, it ain't. Councillor Wilbur.
Well, I just want, I mean, and I did make a point of putting a tick down every time someone mentioned parking last night. It was mentioned 57 times. Like, it was mentioned a lot, more than anything else. And what I did appreciate was the young worker that was there that last night that said, I live in a crew house. That means his company rented or purchased a house and put all of their crew in there to live. And he said, I would gladly rent a suite or another place, but there's nowhere for me to rent or live. So we're forced to live in a house and park.
There's a ton of rental stuff available.
You know what? When Amanda Wager's house burnt down, it was really hard to find her a place to live. So there is not a ton of rental available. And parking is a bloody issue, and we're going to have to deal with it sooner or later.
I got single-family homes across the street from me that are single-family homes that are they're struggling getting parking for just themselves.
It's an issue.
Yeah. Thank you. So nothing under mayor's business, anything under diary?
Your worship, did council wish to issue directions for further work now? So things that I've heard discussed is that you might wish staff to bring you back options on addressing legal nonconformity.
Yes.
That you might want staff to bring you back options on rooming house enforcement. But you might want staff to bring you back options on parking enforcement, especially around snow removal and garbage collection. And that you might want options brought forward on business licenses for suite owners or owners of rental accommodation. These are all matters that were outside the scope, but were mentioned last night.
Did we not do that in a meeting? I thought I put that forward in
It was held in abeyance pending the outcome of these matters.
Okay. So do we need to make a motion then?
If you wish staff time to be spent on that, it would be cleanest to make a motion to those effects now.
Then I will make that motion.
Moved by Councillor Wilbur, seconded. Councillor Rogers, discussion. The only aspect for me is if we have suites that are legal in residences, I'm not clear on why we would ask them to go through a regulatory process to get a permit for it if it's a legal conforming use of the property. And I only have that as a question.
So your worship, in some communities,
Figure that out.
those who provide rental accommodation are exempt from business licensing. They don't have to register themselves as a business. In other communities, at some trigger, number of units, for instance, if you have a secondary suite that you're renting in addition to a main building, you must apply for and receive a business license. It triggers more frequent inspections. But I'm not saying that you do that. I'm saying that you want to look at the options, what some other people do about that.
Okay, good. Thank you. Further questions, comments, directions? Councillor Rogers?
I would just like to talk about business licenses for a second. It is a rental, it is a business. We need to be able to have our enforcement officers make sure that that rental is safe for the neighbors and for the people in the community, because that business could be turned into a rooming house, which we will be dealing with it also. I'm very supportive of having a business license for a rental unit, because that is a business.
Okay, thank you. So we'll get, the administration will bring it back, report on it in terms of giving us some direction and...
Not right away, there's a lot of work here. So.
Thank you. Further comments, questions on the motion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Consent calendar.
Nothing.
Immediate question.
All right, I have a handful. So I just wanted to be clear, there are a number of spin-off issues to this, rooming house licensing, parking. The last motion that you just passed there is directing staff to look at those for a separate bylaw.
Well, some of it may not be a bylaw, it might be just
procedural, but many, it might be several bylaws as well.
Okay, but those issues are not addressed in 4254, so those are still, we'll see where those go, basically.
They may be components that are contained in other bylaws, like the parking bylaw, or so that'll come from administration back to us.
Okay. And just 12 hours ago, you had a public hearing on this matter, and then you turned around and had a special council meeting to, in this case, pass the bylaw. Why was time of the essence?
You know, it's been going on for a year and a half, and we really need to provide certainty. I think council's put a lot of time, effort, energy, administration have, the community has, people have. We need to provide certainty in terms of what we're doing as a community, because that direction for everybody is necessary. And so we didn't want to. We didn't want to leave it for another 2 weeks or 3 weeks after the public hearing for our next regular meeting. We put the notice out so we could get it dealt with.
And I don't want to say the issue of secondary suites is over by any means, but how does it feel now to finally, after a year and a half, have something on the books actually taking steps to regulate suites?
I think the passion for our community is evident for all of us, and you're not looking for perfection, you're looking to move the bar higher. And so that's hopefully what this has done today, and allows us to continue to move the community to a better place for the future. That's our role as council, to set that policy, to try to drive the community into a direction that we think is going to be best for our community.
And there was talk of a couple of different ways how to deal with properties which would now be non-conforming with this amendment. There was talk of Swiss cheesing and grandfathering. Am I correct in thinking those issues will be dealt with at a later time?
Yeah, well, the bylaw now changes the issue of suites for duplexes as an example. And so anybody that's made an investment in the community for that as a property, if something happened to it, they would become non-conforming. They wouldn't be able to rebuild it or replace it in its current form. So we need to make sure that we have an understanding of what that means and how we address that for the future for them.
So if you've got, say you're in CD2 and you have a duplex with a suite in it, and you want to get some work done on that, I mean, are you going to attempt to make that?
Johnny, it could be anywhere in our community. There's duplexes with suites in them across our community, or there's homes currently in our community that have a suite in them that might be an RS1. And so the minute you change the bylaw, it changes what the future of them, if it burned down as an example and was totally destroyed, that they couldn't build it in its current form, so they become a non-conforming unit. And we need to make sure that we understand that and provide some certainty for those people that have made that investment in our community, I think is what we said, and we want to make sure we bring that back.
And just two more here. Fort St. John is attempting kind of an education campaign around legal and illegal secondary suites. Do you see the city of Dawson Creek doing anything similar, just letting people know?
So I think we always are asking anybody that sees an illegal activity that's taking place, whether it be a boarding house, rooming house, home with a suite, that we want people to be able to have the comfort to know that they can report that to our city through our bylaw enforcement, and we would inspect it and deal with it if it is an illegal suite or an illegal. And I think that's all I read in the Fort St. John news release, is that they're asking for that to happen, for people to either bring them into conforming or understand the issue of them if they're not.
And just a last question. You had voiced some concerns earlier that the feedback you were getting was largely from developers. Do you think you got a wider range of public opinion on the secondary suite issue last night? And do you think that informed your decision?
Yeah, no, I was really happy. Personally, I was really happy with the turnout last night at the public hearing. I thought we got a good turnout. It was good to see a wide variety of folks there. And that's what you hope for, right? You hope that your democracy, you get the input from the residents and the business and community to help guide you in the decisions you're making. And I think all of council, that's our goal, right?
Great, thank you.
Natalie?
Could I just grab some quotes from Councillor Rogers, yourself, and Councillor Wilbur afterwards?
Absolutely. Well, I can speak for myself, you can.
Oh, well, if you guys are I'll be nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Today and every day.
Anything further? Motion to adjourn. Councillor Schumann, Councillor McFadden, all in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.